Hello, everyone. GM. Welcome to another episode of Overpriced JPEGs. I'm Carly Riley. And today on the show, in the spirit of NFTs beyond PFPs, which is our theme here at Overpriced JPEGs, at least for this month, I have as my guest, John Rogers. John was the first franchise management hire at Disney and created their franchise management department. And really what that means is John was in charge of, from a business perspective, looking at many of Disney's biggest franchises and saying, what do the next 10 years look like for this franchise? How are we going to develop it? How are we going to make sure that the audiences don't burn out from it? Are we going to do a theme park ride? Are we going to do merchandise? Are we going to do 6 more movies? Like, what makes the most sense for this franchise? So as we talk about in this NFT space, intellectual property and creating franchise IP, no one really is better suited to talk about what's happening based on what has happened than John Rogers. And what's so cool is that John not only worked at Disney for a long time and did this in the Web 2 world, he now works in the blockchain space and is, as far as anybody can be, is fairly native to what's happening in blockchain. So his ideas around what's going to happen with intellectual property in Web 3, I think are awesome. I really enjoyed this conversation. I learned so much. And I think it is so critical that if you are buying into NFT projects that are telling you that their value proposition is basically the IP that they're building, which is like all projects at this point. Like most projects tell you that their long-term vision has something to do with intellectual property. You must understand what the heck that means, because not all intellectual property was created equal. And there's lots of different models that are emerging in the NFT space that are really interesting in terms of IP and, you know, how it might be monetized and how it might make money for the individual user. But like, you got to understand it. So if you're curious about this at all, if you're investing in these kinds of projects, definitely listen to this interview all the way through. I think John did a great job explaining this from a Web 2 perspective. Again, I learned a lot. So I hope you do too. And before we get right into things, we do have a word from our sponsors. And I want to give a big shout out to the team over at Bankless, the editors on this team. Thank you guys so much for everything you do, making this show run. Mixed by Matt, I think on Twitter, and Dave. Really appreciate you guys. All right, here's a word from our sponsors.
Polygon is Ethereum's largest and most vibrant scaling solution to date. With millions of monthly users and all of the biggest DeFi apps, the Polygon ecosystem has turned into a blossoming metropolis of DeFi activity. Transactions on Polygon are quick and cheap, allowing users the freedom to achieve their DeFi goals, all while being economically anchored to Ethereum. But Polygon isn't just the proof-of-stake sidechain. The Polygon team is building a suite of scaling solutions, including Polygon Hermes, Maiden, Nightfall, and Zero, all with different design choices in order to be optimized for all possible crypto use cases. If you're a developer who wants to build on the Polygon ecosystem, go to the link in the show notes to check out their fantastic documentation. And if you're a user who just wants to experience fast and cheap DeFi, you can bridge over your ETH or other tokens and start playing around with any of the thousands of applications that are available on Polygon. Unstoppable Domains is the #1 provider of NFT domains. With domains ending in .crypto, .x, or .nft, Unstoppable Domains lets you replace your long, complex wallet address with a human-readable address. Using Unstoppable, you can verify the ownership over your NFTs, log into Web3 apps, and join tens of thousands of people using them as their Twitter usernames. With Unstoppable Domains, you can have all of your crypto addresses registered to one single domain. So it doesn't matter where crypto payments are coming from or where they're going. By registering all of your crypto addresses to your Unstoppable domain, all of that is taken care of in the back end. Better yet, with Unstoppable Domains, you don't have to worry about gas costs or renewal fees because you own it. Buy your domain and you can show it off as your new Twitter username. So you can get your name for as low as $5 at unstoppabledomains.com.
I'm so excited to welcome you, John Rogers, here to Overpriced JPEGs today. Very excited to chat with you about what I think is one of the most important topics right now in NFTs, in the blockchain, and that is intellectual property. All of these projects, it feels like, are in some way telling their communities that what they are building is intellectual property. And I don't think we often dig deep enough on like what the heck that actually means and what intellectual property is. you've worked with some of the biggest IPs, the biggest brands in entertainment, and some of the biggest franchises in entertainment for many years now. So I know your perspective on this is super valuable, super helpful. And we also work together in a couple other contexts. You're friends of Block, which is the company where I work. So very excited to be bringing our relationship here to the overpriced JPEGs world. Let's start with who you are. Tell us your background, why I'm so excited to have you here talking about IP with me.
Yeah, so as you sort of set it up, I've had about a 20-year career in intellectual property, primarily in feature film entertainment. But I really at one point in my career, I shifted over and joined Lucasfilm. So I was on the marketing and the brand marketing team for what we thought was going to be the last Star Wars movie ever, Revenge of the Sith. And it turns out that's not the case. But that was really my introduction to the entertainment industry. Before that, I'd been at an advertising agency, and I started my career after graduate school in management consulting. I was a strategy consultant at Booz Allen Hamilton, and sort of just one position led to another and kind of moved me deeper into the intellectual property space. So I spent about 2.5 years at Lucasfilm. And then when the Star Wars project was over, the head of marketing at Disney called me up and said they were looking to create a whole brand new function that never existed before called franchise management, and asked if I would come and be the founding executive on the franchise management function at Disney. So I was, as far as I know, the first person in Hollywood to have franchise in their formal job title.
What does franchise management mean?
It's different for every studio. It's not a standardized definition. In the Disney context, it means that you're managing the brand from a long-term perspective. So looking at a property, let's say like Tron, for instance, looking at it from not just the next movie or the next TV show, but looking at it from a 10-year out perspective and planning out what is that content plan, what are the projects that we want to develop to further the storytelling and to further the brand, and what projects, more importantly, and this is the toughest part of the job, do we want to say no to? And traditionally, studios, and they still, most of them do this to this day, is say yes to everything. They just want to make every buck they can. And for Disney, it was saying, we need to be selective. We need to think about from a long term, what won't hurt this property if it's just a quick buck. And so at times that made me a very unpopular person at Disney, because I was usually the one to say no. And but it's really taking that long-term planning perspective.
And I think it's clear past couple of years, I think, have demonstrated how strong Disney's been in this. I think we'll talk about this maybe a little bit more later as it applies to NFTs and things like that. But The Mandalorian, like I just feel like all these projects that Disney has ultimately said yes to has strengthened their brand positioning tremendously. And I feel like I hear that even as somebody like pretty outside the industry. I feel like that's the general consensus is Disney's done this brilliantly. So congratulations for your role in that.
My little piece of setting up the team from the beginning. But, one of the challenges, and you'll see this with Disney and with all the studios, is the film side of things, that there's a lot of pressure from the film side to make movies that drive the property. And so when the franchise teams are working, they're working across all outlets, all media platforms, film, television, publishing, interactive, you name it. And so you've got this careful plan, but then if a film comes along that's not carefully planned, it can really set things wrong. And so one of the things that the team has to work closely with the production partners and the filmmakers is getting that all to fit. And there's always this, because the film is the big thing, it's the real driver, that there's always a lot of pressure just to let the film do what it wants to do. So you've got to create great relationships with your filmmakers and your production executives to get this to work. And that was one of the things I think we did excellently at Disney on my team, was that we really put extra emphasis into making those relationships with the creative talent and building that bridge between the suits and the creatives. And so whenever I get asked what my superpower is, I always say it's that being able to marry left brain and right brain thinking, that I can meet with a costume designer, talk about design, and walk across the hall to talk to a lawyer about deal points in a talent deal.
I want to come back to this and ask you about how you think that same skill set is needed maybe in these NFT projects and what projects need to be investing in if they are going to build long-term IP from a creative perspective. But I want to kick off with one of the reasons that I wanted to bring you on here today, because you have a very crisp thesis that I think is fascinating. And I'll say it here briefly, but then you can really say it the way you want to, which is that blockchain is really an emerging media platform, and that you think ultimately NFTs and the blockchain will stand really shoulder to shoulder with film and TV and these these major media platforms. And that's just like, whoa, like that's a huge idea and a huge statement. Put it in your own words and tell me a little bit more about that thesis.
You just took my terms, Carly.
Sorry, I've heard you say it several times.
Yeah. So here's my thesis, and that this is, I think, something a little bit different than most people look at blockchain. And blockchain is many things. That's one of the amazing things. It can be so many different things. But from a media person's perspective, what has me excited is that in time, as it matures and content matures and the expertise develops, blockchain will be an originator of content standing, quote unquote, shoulder to shoulder with film, television, publishing, internet, you name it. And that stories and characters that are created on the blockchain will move easily into the worlds of film and television and publishing, and characters created in the worlds of film and television and publishing will move more easily over to the world of blockchain. And we're already beginning to see the very early trials of this and the missteps and the good steps. But in 2 years' time, I would say 2 or 3 years' time, but the pace of this industry, it could be in 2 and 3 months' time, you're going to start to see real projects crack that and stand up and become just the next great franchises. And so what's got me excited to move over into this NFT space is that I want to be, it's like looking over the shoulder of Marconi when he invented the radio. I want to be a part of that, and I want to understand how the plumbing works of the technology and create the great stories that are going to build on top of that plumbing and move to other worlds.
Why do you think that? What is it about blockchain that makes it such a natural place for film and TV to both go to and then to originate from?
Yeah, there's aspects of how a consumer and audience will engage with the characters and the stories that are unique to the platform. So it has elements of linear storytelling, but it's not true linear storytelling. It has interactive elements, but it's not true console gaming interactivity. So it can stand and have its own unique attributes. So a fan, let's just say Star Wars came to the blockchain, which I'm certain it will someday, and we'll talk about that later, I'm sure, that a fan of Star Wars can experience and engage themselves in the world of Star Wars in a different way. You can have a longer drawn out experience on the blockchain. You can own a part of the Star Wars universe on the blockchain. Web3, you can own a part of it. And that's what I think is really exciting for another way of engaging audiences.
Changing and expanding that fan experience. Sounds
it's
like
another layer. It's another layer of that fan experience.
So let's start where this started, right? Which is the Web 2 world. And this is a broad question, but I think it's a jumping off point. How does intellectual property work in Web 2? What is intellectual property? What does it mean, right? I know you have a lot of thoughts on all this.
Traditionally, it's been centralized. And this is actually another aspect of what makes blockchain different. It's now moving to decentralized storytelling. And so you've usually had a centralized owner, let's say Disney, that owns a property like Tron. And you've had centralized creative development. They hire a director and a producer or whoever, a writer to create the stories. And then you push it out through a mass channel. What's different here is that, not actually answering your question directly, but what's different with Web3 is that it's now decentralizing that. But traditionally, it's coming from a top-down approach. And now you're creating opportunities to do that differently.
And we've talked about this a bit before, and you've talked about there's an anchor with intellectual property. So in some cases, I know you've worked, I think, on Pirates of the Caribbean, that actually started as a ride at Disney and then became a film and then became all these other things, whereas other properties start as games or as TV. And I guess one question I want to push on is, for something to really be intellectual property in a massive way, does it have to ultimately have a full story, like the way Pirates of the Caribbean obviously is a full story now, or Cars, another property I know you worked on, is?
No, it doesn't necessarily have to have the full story at the beginning, but it does have to have a vision and a road. You may call it a roadmap, but it might be overstating it to say that there's a roadmap. There has to be a vision behind where that story can go. So Cars, for instance, that started off with a road trip that John Lasseter took with his family, and that was the idea. And he created in his mind this world of cars. And it was at the very early stages a very undeveloped idea, but that was the start of how they began to build out that franchise. And then it just grew into other areas. But there's usually an anchor point where it begins, and there's usually like a natural home. Star Wars is in film. James Bond, they very clearly have said, is in film. Other properties are going to be in publishing. Harry Potter, for instance, as fabulous as those movies were, Harry Potter's home is always going to be in publishing. So there's always that anchor point. And I think what's going to be interesting with NFTs evolving is that there will be anchor points that franchise, let's say Bored Apes, will have the anchor point in NFTs, but you might see a Bored Apes movie or TV show coming in the future.
You said to me that one of the things you found at Disney was they wanted every property to be a $1 billion merchandise empire, and everything, understandably, I suppose, given the world, is about like, how do we make more money? How do we extract more value from this? And your perspective was that not everything bigger isn't always better in all channels, and that you really need to kind of tailor make a plan for a franchise for the property. Talk to me about that a little bit more, and I'd be curious how that might apply to this new world and from how people should think about investing in NFT projects.
And this is where, when my team was founded at Disney in 2005, where things really began to change. Traditionally, Disney was make the most, everything as big as possible, and make every single penny possible. And every studio had run that way, and some of them still run that way. What changed was we really began developing these analytics around franchises and understanding them from a qualitative and a quantitative perspective, deep audience research. We really began to realize that, hey, this property isn't going to be the next Star Wars, but it could be great. It can drive great affinity for consumers in a certain segment that we want to target. It can be its own thing. And so one of the things that we always worked with our filmmakers and executives on was understanding that you might think that this is the next Star Wars, but it shouldn't be. This should really be something different and special in its own thing. And it's always about finding that right size, not taking a deal because you can, but taking the right deals and really having that perspective. And that was always a challenge on every project, of an ongoing discussion with the senior executives of, what is the right program behind this property? What is the right size for it? That deal is probably not a good deal. And that also led to a lot of internal challenges, because you have, say, teams in the Disney Interactive or Disney Consumer Products who had quarterly goals they had to hit or annual goals they had to hit. And there was a lot of pressure of this big hot movie coming from the studio or TV show coming from ABC, for instance, has to be huge. So we're going to do everything we can. And our answer was, no, you're not. You can't do that, because you're going to burn this property out. You're going to, in 2 years, everyone's going to be sick of it. And we have a 10-year idea what this can be. So there was a lot of that. And what we got through, and why Disney's been so successful over the recent, say, decade, is that process and that conversation can happen. It doesn't have to be adversarial, and it's expected. Whereas at other studios, still to this day, it still doesn't happen. It's just do everything you possibly can.
I think that's so interesting. Do you have specific examples you'd be willing to give of a property that you guys were like, no, don't burn this out. This can't take all of that exposure?
The biggest one, which everyone's familiar with, is Pirates of the Caribbean. That, Pirates, especially in the 2005 to 2009 timeframe, was probably Disney's most important franchise. And there's a way, it's not necessarily by the box office. It was also one of the top 3 drivers of attendance at the theme parks. And when you think of what that dollar value is behind attendance at the theme parks, it's a multi-billion-dollar annual property. And so there was this emphasis, especially after how big Johnny Depp got and the property got, just to do everything. And so that really became a challenge for me, because in those cases, I was saying no to a lot of projects more than I was saying yes, because we can't take $500,000 on this deal here because we have a $2 million opportunity the year after. And so, and the story is not going to fit with the story the filmmakers want to tell in the next movie. And so we were really having to manage and right size Pirates of the Caribbean to avoid burning it out. And that was years that conversation kept going on.
Where is Pirates of the Caribbean today? And how did that vision end up playing out? I have a question. This will tie, I think, to NFTs in a way that I'm curious about, but let's start there. The
way I'd characterize this, and I should say I have no contact with any of the teams at Disney on this topic, is that Pirates of the Caribbean is in turnaround. That first wave of movies probably overlived their welcome. Some of the creative changed in the later years, and Gore Verbinski left as director, it changed a little bit. And I think that they're now in a regrouping period. And I do believe Pirates will come back. I believe it should come back. It's too important for Disney, at least certainly in the theme park perspective, but just owning the idea of pirates is theirs. And that's a big idea to own. And so I think it's in turnaround. They're probably trying to figure out, what does that creative look like with or without Jack Sparrow? Or does Johnny Depp come back as Jack Sparrow? Or is there a new Jack Sparrow? And those are the questions that they're answering internally right now. But I do believe it'll come back.
I see a Disney Plus show in its future. What do you think of my prediction?
I think Pirates will be a theatrical property, and would be surprised if it goes to Disney Plus.
Oh, really? Okay, so it's not.
I would be surprised.
I feel like there's been this move to, instead of making another movie, like I think didn't they do this with The Mandalorian? Wasn't that originally a movie? And then they were like, actually, let's break it out into a series and make people buy Disney Plus for it. Okay.
Yeah.
All right,
So
never mind. Bad prediction on Carly's part.
in Star Wars, you look at these worlds, and we actually take tremendous time and spend a lot of resources to develop what we call the mythology, which sometimes they'll call it a show Bible, but we called it the mythology. And it's a binder that's like 5 inches thick of documentation about the full world, all of the history, all of the characters. Star Wars has what's called the data bank, which is more of a digital mythology, but it's really documenting that and putting that plan in place. And Star Wars is a bigger world. It's a bigger idea. So it has more applications in, say, to go from film to TV. Pirates isn't quite as big of that world. As big as it is, it's not as big of a world. So it's a little bit harder to move that to other areas.
So I ask you in part about where Pirates is today and what that life cycle looked like, and it's obviously still ongoing. But because part of what I'll say it this way, part of what terrifies me about launching NFT projects, and I'm involved in launching NFT projects, and I've had people ask, will you do an NFT for Overpriced JPEG someday? Is it feels like it's a lifetime commitment, right? Like you basically have to keep interest up in the project for forever to keep, in this case, like NFTs valuable. Is that true? How do you think about that? How should investors be thinking about that? Like, should they be trying to time life cycles in terms of buying and selling? Like, what does that mean in the NFT world and for investors?
Well, I think for NFT creators, you need to come into the project with that already planned out. Is this because you are committing to a community? You are building a community that's going to be potentially ongoing for years, and you need to really say upfront to that community, "Hey, this is an ongoing initiative. You buy into this project. We're going to be engaged with you as long as there's interest in it, and that could be years down the road." In some cases, and I haven't really seen this yet, but I think that this is a fair model, is to say up front, this is a 2-year project. We are going to engage with you for 2 years. You're buying into a 2-year project. We're going to take you through an experience with story online and offline. We're going to take you into other fun activities that you might not be expecting. And at the end of 2 years, the project goes away. But then investors might say, well, is that going to have value at the end? And it could be, well, we turn it back to the community at that point. You then take full control. So I haven't seen those models evolve yet, but this idea of like a long-term commitment, I don't know if that's going to be sustainable in most projects. It just, if you have an apes or punks, yes, it's going to generate enough revenue to justify a team to support it. But at some point, some of these projects are just going to not be able to support the staff and the time and the resources required. And what you don't want to see is a rug pull. You don't want everyone just to wake up one day and find that the Twitter's been shut down and the Discord is shut down. Like that's a bad experience. And I do believe the concept of pedigree is going to be important. And you're beginning to see this now. That on the film and TV side of things, we look at a team that comes in to pitch a project and talk about their pedigree. What have they done in the past? What are they capable of? That hasn't fully developed in NFTs yet, but you're going to start seeing teams like Yuga Labs or Larva Labs or Block that will start developing their pedigree and reputations and say, okay, that's a great team, so I'm going to invest in that project because I trust the team, even if I don't know as much about the project. And that will be very important going forward.
I am starting to develop couple models in my mind around how I feel like intellectual property has been playing out in the blockchain and on the blockchain so far. And I want to get your reactions to them. And I want to hear if you think this is correct or if I'm missing something. It strikes me that on one end of the spectrum, you have what I would call the closest replication of what you see in Web 2, which is you have a central team that is building something out and they already have NFTs associated with it. And they're basically saying these NFTs are going to be valuable collectibles in the way that the first Mickey Mouse drawing would be a valuable collectible if you could get your hand on that because of what Disney and Mickey Mouse has become. The example there to me is VeeFriends. And I think Gary Vaynerchuk has been very explicit about what he is doing. He's saying, I'm a very talented business person. I have tremendous connections. I'm going to make this set of characters that I've drawn relevant via building out an animation studio that's making movies or making TV shows or making books and exploring all of those avenues. And so at the end, you as a VeeFriend holder are holding a collectible. Now, there's actually a lot more to that because you also are getting other benefits. And I think this gets into your point about an expanded fan experience by holding this NFT that I don't get by holding a Disney collectible, for example. But that feels like one model we're seeing play out. And I think that's what Gary Vee is doing. On the total other end of the spectrum, you have projects like Blitmaps and Cryptodes that are fully in the Creative Commons, I think is the way to phrase that. And I've talked about Blitmaps a number of times actually on the podcast, where there's a central team there. There was one originally, but they have said, we have no copyright to any of this. It completely belongs to the community. You guys are driving the story, and we have no sort of ownership over this at all. We're going to see what y'all create. And then you have something in the middle, which I think is where you have your Bored Apes, for example, where the community doesn't own the property as a whole, but you own full rights to your specific ape, for example. You can do Jenkins, the butler or whatever, who is now repped by CAA, may go make a ton of money that will benefit the Jenkins owner, but they couldn't go and do something as a whole with the Bored Ape property because they don't own that as a whole. Do you think those three breakdowns are what we're seeing right now? Are there others I've missed? And I would love your assessment on each of those.
Yeah, I think those are I think you've assessed the three that we've seen so far. I do believe there's going to be more models coming and different models coming in the future. And I have an idea for one that I think I've been playing around in my head that I like a little bit better. And we can talk about that in a second.
Yeah, I want to hear that.
I can see, like, if you go the complete Wild West, you own everything. It's yours. We're out of it. I can see how fun that would be for a member of the community, an investor, a consumer, but it's going to run into some problems. And I'll talk about that one in a second. So hold that thought for a second. Then the middle model, which is, all right, like, we're Bored Apes. We've got this mother brand of the Bored Apes Yacht Club, and that is kind of defined and you can't touch that. But what you can do with your ape, you can go sign a deal with CAA, and the owner of the ape next to you can go sign a deal with CAA, and then we'll see kind of what develops. That model is also a little challenging, why I like my model better. And then VFriends is just awesome. Like, that's the pedigree model. That is, you are investing in a team or a person, a creator, based entirely on their pedigree, and you're trusting them. You're going to rely in what they're doing. And I think that model has a huge future. And I mean, Gary's probably the leader in the space right now, but there's other teams kind of right behind him who are emerging and will be there right side by side with him and following that pedigree model. Now, what don't I like about the Wild West approach of just do anything you want, or the kind of the middle ground of Bored Apes? And that is, I see the fun of decentralizing the storytelling and the engagement, that you own it, you can go develop it. And I do believe you should own, like, that in any of these models, you should own the character. The problem is, what happens when Bored Ape 52 signs a movie deal and Bored Ape 84 signs a movie deal, and both movies are going to come out simultaneously? That is eventually going to burn out the property, would be my concern. On the traditional side of things, that absolutely couldn't happen, because you would burn out pirates. You'd burn out a franchise. And you don't want a centralized organizing authority, because it's sort of against the spirit of Web3. So how do you manage that? How do you kind of keep the spirit of ownership and decentralization, but yet not allow a property to be burned out? And so the idea I've been playing around with is, you launch with a limited license. You trust in the team and launch with a limited license. Let's just say something with llamas, for a trivial example. And when
you say launch with the team, that'd be like Yuga Labs created
exactly.
Bored Ape Yacht Club. So you launch with a Yuga Labs.
Yep. Yuga Labs launches their llama project, and the licenses are restricted. But what happens is, everyone who's invested then and owns a llama has a share in a DAO. And that DAO uses part of the treasury to then build out the franchise plan, to say, here is the roadmap, here is the storyline. And you could develop internally as a creative team, or bring in experts who have writing experts who can develop that story and that long-term franchise plan, and then let the DAO decide. And that way, when Llama 52 signs a movie deal and Llama 84 signs a movie deal, the DAO can decide which of those projects should be moving forward. And that way, you're still representing the spirit of decentralization, but you're also protecting a long-term kind of vision for that this brand could grow and become many things. And I think what's going to happen is, in, like, say, 12 to 18 months, when a lot of these Bored Ape projects come to market, I think you're going to see a lot of I think a lot of them are going to be really successful, but I also think it's going to be a little messy in terms of contradictory storytelling. Like, are they in the pirate era selling pirate ships, which is one project I've seen? Are they going into outer space in a futuristic world, which is another project I've seen? Like, where do the Bored Apes live where's their mythology? And that is what needs to be documented.
I was going to ask, do you have any insights into the Jenkins Bored Ape deal, or what's going to be done with that? Is that one of the references you're making?
Only what I've read in the trades, and so no insider knowledge at all. And I'm not a Bored Ape investor. I'm kicking myself because I had the opportunity and didn't.
Aren't we all?
Aren't we all? So I'm not an investor, but only what I've read in the trades about kind of ideas that have been pitched to, say, CAA or other, say, producers. So no knowledge there.
Okay, so I want to talk about this model you just laid out. I think it's so interesting. And so when you say licenses are restricted, you say you launch with the Yuga Labs, they launch their Llamas project, licenses are restricted. It means you're basically saying the individual holders can't do whatever they want with even their own individual llama.
For say a lockup period. So say 1 year lockup period. So for your first year owning the llama, there's a restricted license. So you can't just take llama 52 and do a movie deal in that first year. And what's happening is in that first year is the community through the DAO is deciding on what is that long-term plan. They're investing, using that some of that treasury to invest into the project and developing that long-term plan. And at that point, the license opens up. So you then convert the license to say, Creative Commons, go do whatever you want, and the DAO will decide if there's a conflict.
After that year, it opens up, you're saying?
Yep. So
wow. And so you think, is the ideal here that the team that launches it is actually a team that has a certain level of expertise in how you go about planning for a future roadmap and a franchise? Somebody in that team is a writer, or you need a certain level of built-in expertise to start to kind of set up the framework and then let the community make the decision. Would that be the ideal way this would go?
It doesn't have to be necessarily. There has to be some sort of a vision. So there has to be a kind of an organizing vision. And it could be as simple as what we call a log line, like just a 2-sentence, 3-sentence statement about what this world can be. And then it can be turned over and let the teams develop expertise and content.
What are the experts you would need? Because you say, oh, you just need like a 2 to 3 sentence log line. But as somebody who doesn't come from this world, I'm imagining myself being in that community and being like, what the F am I supposed to do? Like, I don't know how to build Star Wars. Like, so what would be like if you were advising a project right now that wanted to do this, but doesn't come from that world? It's like, here are the 5 people you should probably have on your team to guide this project forward before it completely gets turned over to the Masses who have never done this before.
So let's run through a scenario. Let's take the llama example. So I've now launched my llama project. So it's my project, and I've written up a couple of guiding statements, pages, comments about what I feel the world of llamas should be. And now we've rolled out the project. I've got 8,000 so NFT holders. We've created our DAO to vote on what we want to do next. We're going to hire an expert to come in and actually write the mythology for us and sort of give us this guiding document or tool. And so we'll do that. Now, who are the people that you would hire, assuming the DAO voted and approved that approach? You could go in 2 directions. There are consulting experts in franchise building. So that's one direction. One group is called Starlight Runner.
John Rogers?
Or me.
Would you consider yourself, well, aren't you, isn't that sort of what you are as an expert in franchise building?
I am the builder of the business plans and the brand planning. Okay. I'm not the writer. I am not a creative writer. Okay. But there are experts who in that writing side of things who are available as consultants. Yep. Or you could go and actually hire an actual writer and developer, someone who has expertise and experience developing like long form shows and storytelling and movies. And they're there as well. And so you go and solicit one of them, hire them to actually build out that mythology for you. And then what you're giving all the members of the DAO is it could literally be a binder of mythology that can then be taken to any project you want to develop and build it from there. So it's a model that hasn't been done yet. It's one I'm very interested in because I think it could solve some of the problems that we're going to see with the kind of the Wild West, just do whatever you want approach, but still respect the spirit of decentralization and the spirit of ownership in Web3.
So this DAO, this collective, we all own llamas. We vote and say, yes, we want XYZ writer to build out the mythology for this project. Now we as the DAO, and we've agreed that we're going to spend X dollars from the treasury perhaps to pay this writer to do that. And then now we as the collective own this mythology, and you're saying the next step is then to take it to who do you approach then for stage 2? Well, and I'm sure there's infinity options you go. Do you want a show? Do you want a movie? Do you want whatever?
Yeah, and that's when the license converts. That's when the license becomes Creative Commons, and it's going to be up to the owners of the llamas, the members of the DAO, to go develop what they want. Some will do nothing and just hold it as an investment or as something to engage the community with. Some will go sign a deal with CAA and try to pitch that all around, any studio that wants to take it. And some will go to publishing or music and but you have that guiding document. And if there's any potential conflicts in projects, the DAO has the right to say, or has an ability to say, we can't have this conflict.
If it goes to the Creative Commons at that point, I'm trying to understand the benefit actually of making it Creative Commons there, as opposed to just the central body, quote unquote, that owns it are the members of the DAO. So it's centrally owned by 10,000 people, say, because it strikes me if you go to the Creative Commons, suddenly now a competing DAO that didn't buy into that original project can write their own mythology that's better and go take that to CAA.
Well, the competing DAO wouldn't own the rights to the core IP. So they wouldn't own
So when you say it goes to Creative Commons,
it's really saying is that the investors in the DAO, the owners of the NFTs, then have the ability to go do deals if they want. If you want to,
so the ownership transfers from the Yuga Labs initial team to the DAO. That's what you're suggesting, to the owners of the DAO.
Yep.
Okay. Does that mean that it is like pure Creative Commons, or again, there's some sort of almost like legal transfer from Yuga Labs to
you probably
this
wouldn't
LLC
say
represented by the DAO?
Right. You probably wouldn't say it's pure Creative Commons because it's because the DAO is involved in this in some way. Yeah. So it's a kind of a
that's
new
what
license
I want to get precise on for folks, is understanding that, because again, I think the Blitmaps is pure Creative Commons model. The entire world has equal ownership in theory over the Blitmaps model.
So it's some sort of it's some sort of a license that allows you to go pursue deals, but at the same time, you're being a member of the DAO has some voting say on what if there's conflict.
Yeah, some right and some exclusivity over members of another DAO that haven't bought in, for example. I want to talk about how to think about making money as members of communities that are, in theory, now investing into intellectual property. And I want to give an example as a place to start, which is there's this exciting idea that if you're good at spotting culture early, right? Like, oh, I saw Pirates of the Caribbean, somehow I got access to that and saw it early and I knew it was going to be a hit. Now that in this new world of Web3, I could invest in that in some capacity and share in the billions of dollars that Pirates of the Caribbean ultimately made. And one of the challenges there is security laws, which say that really it's hard to get around accredited investor laws, and that if you're not an accredited investor just sitting at home, there's limits to what you can be promised. I have an example, but actually before I give that, I want to ask you maybe to talk about some of the ways you see early investors in these projects being rewarded monetarily and otherwise by investing in these kinds of projects.
Well, there's certainly the appreciation in the properties if they grow, which is I think how most people are looking at it. And that's why there's a lot of pump and dump schemes in NFTs, is that it's just it doubles in value in a month and you do that. But ultimately, I think long term, it's about the brand building. It's about building that storytelling and that engagement. Now, there's always going to be a huge market for artists like Beeple that you buy a one of one original piece of art and it grows in tremendous value. But I'm thinking more in terms of kind of PFP projects and projects that have, say, 8,000 llamas. And I think a great opportunity there is building out the franchises, building out a core story, and pursuing opportunities to take it into other areas of media. And so there's a lot of areas around that you can pursue.
So are we just in uncharted territory where we are basically, I want to say, like making stocks out of things that previously weren't stocks, like where we've just sort of collectively decided if the value of a brand goes up, owning an NFT that's a piece of that brand means something, even though legally and technically it doesn't? Like, do you think that's where we are and where we'll stay for a long time?
Well, I wouldn't say it's like that, because I look at its culture. You're investing in culture and owning culture, and that has always been in various forms. I mean, wine has been a great investment traditionally, and that's culture. It's a physical product in a bottle and probably stored in a cellar in Switzerland if it's valuable, but it's a piece of culture. Offline art, physical art has always been a great store of value in culture. So I look at it as it's really you're investing in culture, and that is always proven to be a good investment. And what's offering with NFTs is there's so many different ways to apply the culture than has been before. It's not just a solid piece of art that you have to hang on a wall. It's something that can be transferable. It can be applied in other areas. An example I'm going to give you, which I think is kind of exciting, and I don't know much about it, but I've talked to some friends who are in this space, is that they're working on developing content where you can take an NFT that you own. So you own this llama, but as you're watching a streaming TV show, and this is one of the major streaming services working on this, that your NFT appears on the show in real time as you're watching it. Or my daughter's llama is dressed in her outfit and my llama is dressed in my outfit as you're watching the show, and every person watching the show sees it differently. And that's a whole new way of applying value in this culture that hasn't been done before. So that's a new way to monetize that hasn't been done before.
What streaming platform is that? Can you say?
I can't say. And it's years away. It's years away, but there literally is a team working on this right now.
I think what feels uncharted territory to me, and the reason I'm pushing on this, like, have we just made everything a stock now, even when it wasn't previously? And I have a lot of different, my head swims with some of the stuff because I can be overly logical, like, but like, where's the exact value? Like, help me understand it, Like, I think people who are very skeptical of blockchain and NFTs or Bitcoin, they're like, but it's not actually worth anything. I don't understand. Is owning a collectible, like, what are the most valuable Pirates of the Caribbean collectibles valued at right now? My guess is actually you haven't made 100x your money or 10x your money, maybe even by owning that. Maybe at its peak you did, but right now probably owning a Pirates of the Caribbean collectible is not going to be worth tens of thousands of dollars. Is that true?
That's true. Yeah.
And what feels like might be different here is that this is different than just owning a collectible. We've decided that you somehow own a piece of this brand, like owning a stock that's a piece of Coca-Cola, except a stock has sort of legal ties to the Coca-Cola brand, and you do technically own a piece of that business in a weird way. And have we just decided that now applies to brands, and if you own this NFT and the brand gets big enough, that means it has value? Does that make sense as a question? And is that something new that's happening in your mind?
Well, I think what's partially new here is the transferability, that if you purchased a trading card, let's say you had a LeBron James Topps trading card, or pick any famous athlete, it's a physical card. You're probably putting it in a plastic protective sleeve. You probably have it, if it's really valuable, in a safety deposit box. It's not easily transferable. Whereas with an NFT, it's easily transferable, especially as the marketplaces like Coinbase come online and OpenSea gets better. Hopefully, these markets become more fluid and liquid and easier to move. And I think that's what's really different and new.
You said that Gary Vee right now is the gold standard and what he's doing is amazing. You also said, though, there are other teams emerging to maybe stand shoulder to shoulder with Gary Vee and compete in that space. Is there anything you can say on what those teams are, who's stepping up? And are these teams that are new or coming from the traditional Web 2 world now entering Web 3?
Well, I think these teams are coming from all places. That's what's great about this, is that blockchain can attract and support talent coming from multiple areas, from tech, from film and television, traditional media, kind of where I'm coming from. It can bring in talent even from sports and other areas. So what's awesome is that it's coming from all areas. And I think the key thing is really just thinking smart about the space, operating in a way that is very consumer friendly or audience friendly, and this is a key part, very legitimately and honestly. That there's too many scam projects. We all know this. But over time, it's as a young industry, very immature industry. Over time, scam projects get pushed to the edges. They never go away entirely. This is true in every industry, but they get pushed to the edges, out to the margins.
And so cream rises to the top.
Exactly. And these people, these top projects can come from many places. And so I've got my eye on a number of different NFT creators and teams that I think are really exciting. Now, their projects might not be the most exciting or the biggest in the world right now, but I think these are teams that are thinking about it in the right way and are potentially going to do great things. And they're all doing all different things.
I will ask you for the specific at the end of this episode. So folks have to stay to get your NFT buying advice. Okay. You mentioned this DAO example that I think is really cool, of a new model that could emerge. Me, in my never ending quest to be given a firm answer about how I'm going to make money on something, and not just like, you're buying culture and like someday it'll have value, which, by the way, I love, and I'm in this space because I love that. But like, there's a practical logician in my mind that's like, that's BS. What the heck does that mean? And so here's been my kind of thinking on how you get around these security laws while also promising people potentially very tangible value. And I think I'm going to be talking to a project soon that I think is employing this model. I'll talk to them more about it. But basically, you own the IP of your specific character, but there's a central team that owns the IP as a whole, as we've been describing. And then you lease your specific character in some way back to that central project. And you're saying, I trust you to create some awesome storyline with this set of characters. And then if that project essentially goes on to make a whole bunch of money and becomes the next Pirates of the Caribbean or whatever, name some massive franchise, you get royalties back for that. But the argument is you're not getting royalties just because you bought this, right? So it's not a security. You're being paid royalties because you've leased this to us, the central project. That seems really interesting to me, and a way to fulfill this fantasy of like buying into Pirates of the Caribbean early and actually getting a claim to their whatever many billions of dollars earned. What do you think of that?
Yeah, no, I think there's tremendous opportunity there. It's like saying that you're going to rent Jack Sparrow to Disney.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
that would be awesome. Or you're going to rent Boba Fett to Disney, Lucasfilm.
Yeah, I own Jack Sparrow, and I've now given it to Disney to use in their project.
Yeah,
like, holy shit, that seems massive.
And what's interesting with that model is that, so you've got a project, let's say our llama, a trivial llama example, and all of a sudden a studio shows interest and says, hey, I want to do a movie around llamas. And so you work through the DAO or the organization and say, okay, well, the story that they're coming up with uses these 10 characters out of our project, these 10 llamas in our project. So those 10 llama holders can participate in that revenue stream. But the project as a whole, perhaps everyone benefits, because not everyone's going to have the same chance to participate in those projects. But maybe a revenue part of it, the revenue comes to the whole DAO, the whole collective, but then the individual project holders might get a little bit more. So you have a kind of a split revenue stream where, okay, everyone benefits, but those whose NFTs were used benefit a little bit more because theirs were the ones that were chosen. And for whatever reason, there could be lots of criteria, but I think that has a lot of potential.
Axie Infinity is a game universe filled with cute, fascinating little creatures called Axies that players can collect as pets. Players aim to battle, breed, collect, raise, and build kingdoms for their Axies. There are and will be many varied gaming experiences for Axies, many of them having players compete with each other using complex strategies and tactics to attain top rankings or be rewarded with coveted resources. Others will have them complete quests, defeat bosses, and unlock in-depth storylines. There are countless unique Axies that players can collect with varying body parts and experiences. The Axie universe is a player-owned economy where the players can truly own, buy, sell, and trade the resources they earn in the game through skilled gameplay and contributions to the ecosystem. It's a digital nation where people come together globally with their Axies to play, earn, and live. Join the Axie revolution at axieinfinity.com/bankless. Everyone is talking about the metaverse these days, and we're all still trying to figure out what it actually is, because everyone is looking for how to get exposure to it. That is why a metaverse index fund is so important, because in such a young market, an index can give you broad exposure to all the various players who are building out all these digital worlds that will ultimately become the metaverse. And that's why you should check out the Metaverse Index from the Index Co-op. The Metaverse Index gives you simple, easy, and safe one-click exposure to the emerging open metaverse trend. The MVI Index contains some of the biggest metaverse projects out there, including Axie Infinity, Decentraland, Illuvium, and more. So join thousands of holders who have already trusted nearly $50 million to the MVI Index. And if you buy $500 of MVI on the Dharma app, you can receive $50 worth of ETH on the Polygon network. There's a link in the show notes for you to click so you can get started on your journey into the metaverse.
I want to ask you about Disney's future in NFTs. What do you think that looks like? Bullish, bearish? Give us the deal.
Well, I'm on Twitter on the record saying this, so I'll say
Okay.
my exact quote was, Disney's future in the blockchain is potentially spectacular. And I still stand by that today. I think it is potentially spectacular if they get all of the pieces right and they think big enough. The biggest risk, and I don't think Disney would fall into this, is thinking too small. Mm-hmm. That thinking, oh, we're just going to support a show on Disney Plus or a franchise coming out of the movie studio with an NFT collection. They need to think much bigger. And for me, what that would be is the Disney theme park, blockchain theme park. So imagine if, and I'll just kind of give a hypothetical example. I don't know if it's even possible, but imagine if with the L2s coming online later this year, Disney forks ZK Sync and creates their own dedicated Disney Layer 2 blockchain with zero knowledge rollup technology behind it, so that keeps the transaction costs low and fast. And you can build out their collectibles, keepsakes, PFPs, one-of-one original limited art editions, NFT storytelling, all of that in the Disney blockchain. But because the Layer 2 is built on Ethereum, you still potentially have the chance to move from the L2 to L1 if you buy, say, an original image of Darth Vader, a one-of-one that could be worth thousands or even beyond that. You can then move that from the L2 to the L1 if you want. But it's built on Ethereum and preserves the security of Ethereum. It has the transferability around Ethereum, but you keep the transactions low. I think that thinking big like that going to be the
Why
potential for
would they
Disney.
want to fork it and have their own L2 as opposed to just using one of the existing L2s?
I think because it'd be a little bit around, this is centralization, but it'd be a little bit around the control. They would have the control of the technology, so it can be set up to serve the Disney consumer. And this is going to be a huge use of the blockchain. If you think of how many millions of people could participate through a Disney blockchain. So it needs to I think they would set up their own, but you want that transferability. The community would never allow a Disney blockchain, and it kind of defeats the purpose of a blockchain. Then just set up some servers or something. So I think it preserves that transferability and what the blockchain offers, but it also lets Disney set up their area of it to then be able to set it up and cater. They can make their own marketplace.
They can brand it their way. They can
It'll be the
make
Disney
transactions work the way they want it.
It'll be the Disney Magic Chain or something. Something like that.
It makes me think Avery Aknani, who's the president of Vayner NFT, when I spoke with her, she advises clients on what blockchains to use. And she talked about Flow. And she said there are times where they would recommend Flow for folks who want a closed ecosystem and have enough market power to drive folks to their specific blockchain. So Flow obviously is partnered with the NBA for NBA Top Shot. And the NBA is a big enough name and brand that it has the power to drive folks to their own blockchain. Disney, of course, this makes sense to me in the sense that Disney is obviously also a brand with enough force and power to command their own chain and get people to go specifically to a chain that's theirs.
And what's different here is that now with the L2s coming later this year, that the L2s now offer a lot of what the benefits of what Flow offers and say Palm offers. It offers that, but you can go to Ethereum and you get the benefits of the security model of Ethereum. You get the benefits of that 90% of the NFT activity in the world currently.
You get that social signaling benefit, which I think is huge, that ability to show it off in your OpenSea wallet.
Yeah.
And,
so
if people want to do.
If Disney were to hire me back to be head of NFTs or blockchain for them, what I'd be saying to them is you have to look at all the options, of course, but let's think really big, not think small. And let's think about how do we allow our customers, to our audience, our Disney families, so how they term it internally, the Disney families to participate in a Disney blockchain, but still be part of the bigger world of NFTs. And I think that future is on Ethereum. And the L2s are the way to do that.
Do you think Disney gets on Discord? And I guess this is actually maybe more a question about Discord, because when you talk about expanding the fan experience, which I think is a no-brainer for why NFTs will be everywhere, right? Because for concerts, for everybody, a lot of the experience as a community you get on NFTs right now, it's all on Discord. Do you think that will last? Or is Disney setting up its own fan center? Like they have their own blockchain, they have their own place where you go as a fan of Disney to interact with others. Like where does that fan experience extension happen?
I don't think Discord, the way it's currently set up, would be the Disney experience that they want.
I agree.
I'm not saying that they won't go there or wouldn't go there, but it's just, they're very methodical and they're experts at really trying to understand their customer and what that experience is like. And I don't think Discord offers that experience. I could see them setting up their own sort of system because this is a new kind of community. It's a new way of engaging a community. It's a new way of participating in a community. And they have to address that. So they will have to do something, but Discord is probably not that solution unless there's a new plan for Discord I'm not aware of. So I'd see them building out their own kind of community moderation building system.
You have said to me, I feel like this is deeply controversial, but maybe it's not, and I just don't know enough, that Star Trek is the most mismanaged franchise, I think you said in Hollywood, but it was a grand pronouncement about how Star Trek is wildly mismanaged. And I think they are getting into NFTs.
They are.
Talk to me about what they are doing wrong as a franchise, what you see them doing wrong on the NFT side. Talk to me about this bold proclamation of yours.
Okay, yeah. And I make no friends at Paramount or Viacom or CBS with this statement. But yes, I think the statement is that Star Trek is the most mismanaged franchise in the history of Hollywood. And
okay. Even bigger than I gave you credit for.
I stand by that. And I'm actually personal friends with some of the filmmakers who have worked on the movies. So I may have some tough conversations coming up. But and here's why. Star Trek has just had tremendous history. It's just tremendous content and storytelling. It's more of a television-based history than a film-based history. So when you talk about that home for it, it probably is in the TV space. But the problem that has happened with how Paramount, Viacom, CBS, and these entities have shifted over the years back and forth, sometimes back and forth in the same year, is that it's been traded around. That no one really had that long-term vision and plan. There was no franchise management team to support that property at a critical time that, say, 2007, 2006, when the last round of movies started, to really think about that long-term vision. And then so it got bounced around and traded between, is it movies, is it TV? And the way that Viacom was set up was that it meant it got bounced between CBS and Paramount. And the teams that managed it shifted, and new management has different ideas. And so it just got bounced. And that's why I think it's the most mismanaged, because they've missed so many opportunities, so many chances to grow that brand and franchise. Now, in recent years, they're doing a better job, but there's still no cohesive management of the mythology of Star Trek from a long-term perspective. Now, I am aware that they do have a franchise lead position that they're hiring for at Viacom. So if anyone listening to this is interested in franchise management in Star Trek, I do know that they have a position that they've been trying to hire to be that franchise head. So maybe there is a good future there. But it is such a strong brand. It will come back. I believe it can and will come back.
It feels like there is a Trekkie out there, or many of them, for whom that is like a dream role.
But it really needs to stop and have a centralized home. And that's one of the things that Disney did well. And this is part of how the franchise system is set up at Disney, is that whichever division of Disney originates the property owns the property long term. So Hannah Montana was a Disney Channel property. The Disney Channel franchise team owns it and manages it across all applications forever.
It is so interesting to me that what you're describing is that centralization, and that's what's been lacking in this context. I'm sure that didn't go missed by many people, but I do want to flag that because I think it is interesting and
it is this trade-off of centralization and then obviously the dream of decentralization. But how is there coordination? And what it's really maybe a better way to think of is, what is the coordination layer? How are you communicating? And so a lot of the things that we did in my first 2 or 3 years at Disney on the franchise team was to set up those coordination and communication structures. Just how do we talk to each other? How do teams that traditionally have never even really met, like meet on a weekly or monthly basis to talk about how we're going to develop the property? So I think there's potential there to keep this idea of decentralization, but still have a vision for the property that can support it long term.
While we're on the topic of controversial Hollywood statements, you think that Sony should sell Spider-Man. I went and saw Spider-Man last night. It was great. It's as good as people were saying. I sobbed my eyes out because I'm a crazy. Why should Sony sell Spider-Man?
Another comment that's going to come back to haunt me at some point in the future. Yes. So what I've said is that Sony, despite, and now this is actually great context with the monster success they're seeing with the current movie, should sell Spider-Man back to Disney. And so the question is, why? Is
part of your long-term plan to get hired at Disney?
Yeah. I may have just made some friends at Marvel. And here's the logic. Sony does not own all of the rights to Spider-Man. They don't own it. They rent it from Marvel. And so when they create a production, this current movie, let's say they invest $250 million into production and marketing, they are investing in someone else's property. Marvel is the one that ultimately benefits from the goodwill and long-term value creation of that investment. Now, what Sony gets is they get the immediate box office, and they're going to get great money back from this current release. It's highly profitable, probably. They're going to get great revenue back, but they don't own it. They don't have the long-term, they're investing in someone else's property. So what would be better for them is to sell it back to Disney, and now's a great time because they could sell it probably for a wild number, probably more than $1 billion. And that gives them a fund to grow and develop franchises that they own the publishing rights to, that they own the toy rights to. Marvel owns the toy rights to Spider-Man, and Sony just gets a fee back for like their creative contribution. And so I believe it'd be better just to say, it's almost like that, and I don't think this is true, but what they say, that Columbus got to the Americas and burned his ships to motivate his crew. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but it's that idea that Sony needs to take that step, make the money on Spider-Man that they can, and take that investment and create something that they own and really can grow and become the future. And what's happening is what's called the Red Queen effect. They keep investing in Spider-Man and they keep doing great, well enough, but it's not enough to get them ahead. It's just enough to keep them in the same place, but they're running faster and faster to stay in the same place. And what's happening is their competitors are getting ahead. And so collectively, Sony slowly starts falling further behind, even though they're making tons of money off of it. So I think it's time for Sony to say, we need to either get serious into this franchise game, invest in our own properties that we own, or decide what else they're going to do.
I want you to know that all I'm hearing you say when you talk about all this is Taylor Swift is totally right. She deserves to own her own masters. It's completely unfair that she's had to work for years
to build her brand only for other people to own it. I'm partly kidding, and I'm sure like the 2 audience members who are into NFTs and also as into Taylor Swift as I am are like, oh yeah, I love that, and everybody else is like, what are you talking about? I find this so fascinating. I hope other people find it as interesting as I do, like the strategic side of managing entertainment. And I think it has so much relevance for the NFT space. And as we all now fancy ourselves like IP investors, understanding these calculations feels deeply, deeply relevant to picking good projects from an NFT perspective.
Absolutely. And for the NFT projects that have these opportunities coming to them to take their creations into other areas, it's important to keep your eye on this, that be careful of the rights that you're giving up, because you might think that you've got a great opportunity in front of you right now, but long term, it's going to work against you. And so I think being mindful of those rights and what you're giving up with these deals is really important. And I think this is actually maybe a thing with Apes that's really good, is that the way that Apes is structured, if CAA sells an Apes movie to Sony, for instance, what does Sony own? What can Sony own from that? Like, they can't own the apes because of the way the apes are structured. So it's going to be very interesting as these projects come in and start developing of what are the studios going to buy, what are they going to own, what are they creating, and how do those relationships exist? And none of that's been written yet. It's all going to be brand new.
How is Hollywood thinking about viewing the blockchain NFTs? Are they put off by this idea that you're going to have individuals who own the rights to apes? Is that going to stifle this industry because they're like, we don't want to buy that project because we can't own it fully? Like, are they even thinking like that yet? What is the perception as of right now?
Traditionally, I would say yes. But in the modern context, let's say in the streaming world context, so from say 2019 forward, where we've now shifted to the streaming world, I'd say no. I think that they are so desperate for good content, good ideas, that regardless of where it comes from, they will find a way or try to find a way to make it work. That if the apes is the amazing idea that Netflix has been looking for, Netflix will find a way to make a deal work, or Apple will find a way to make a deal work, or Disney will do that. So I don't think that they're turned off by it at all. I think that this is a whole brand new source of storytelling and content that they haven't had access to before. So I think they're probably thrilled. I am certain that probably in every production team in town in LA probably has someone looking at the NFT space for projects. I am certain of that.
Obviously, to me, one of the benefits, if you are a streaming platform or any content producer right now, is that you have a built-in diehard audience that wants to see their project succeed. If you put together a Deadfellas movie, there's a built-in audience there that is going to be a marketing arm for you, that's going to go out on Twitter, on social media, and hype the hell out of that project. I'm assuming that's part of the calculation, but I'm curious, is it really big enough yet for that to be exciting to them? At the end of the day, there are 5,000 Deadfella holders, or however many there are. There are 5,000 apes holders. That's not really a scary army if you're these massive streaming platforms at this point.
For those of us in the NFT space, it seems like just there's so much dialogue and volume in discourse around, say, apes or punks or Deadfellas that God, everyone in the world has to be excited about this.
Right.
And the reality is, how many people are in blockchain? Probably 10 million, I think, is the estimate I've seen. And how many are in NFTs?
And not all of those people are on NFTs, yeah.
Yeah, you say 3 million. So you're talking the early adopter. So yeah, you're not going to have that mass volume of content of discourse that would say Deadfellas fans are going to drive this movie. So that would definitely be in the consideration. So they're going to have to build on the film side or TV show side marketing to drive that audience. So you're right. They're not going to choose a project based on, it's coming with a built-in audience that we can leverage. Like the Harry Potter book was great because it had millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people who loved those books right when they made those movies. And they came over to the movies. They were able to convert them. That doesn't exist in NFTs yet. And it's not going to exist in NFTs for probably a decade until there's hundreds of millions of people on the blockchain. And so these projects will have to succeed based on the core idea. Is Deadfellas just an amazing idea that translates well and has a mythology that can be told in a TV show or a film or a publishing project? Does Woody's have that? So that's what's going to be what has to drive it, is that core idea of the world and the story and the characters.
So this is so interesting because as this circles us back to the very beginning of this conversation when you said blockchain and NFTs will stand shoulder to shoulder with TV and film. The red flag that comes up for me, or the skepticism that I feel, is around the fact that what people do fall in love with, it feels like, is stories. And that was part of that question I asked around, like, does it have to be a story, right? A picture of Harry Potter, right? Even a cool NFT picture of Harry Potter is going to elicit very little in me. Whereas the books, I, literally could cry thinking about them because I love them so much, right? So what you're describing, it sounds like, is most of this there'll be NFT projects that do create lore that aren't necessarily published books. They're, written out on a desk somewhere, and that'll be what spurs this. But that there is a potential, or I guess it's a question, there is a potential where when there are enough people native to the blockchain and on there, you maybe have a property like a Hello Kitty, which you've actually given that example to me before, where it just starts as I think it just starts as like a character or a visual that people fall in love with. And there's enough love for that for some reason that it spurs everything else.
Yep.
Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's very fair. And Hello Kitty is a great example. And that starts off as a piece of art, and it just becomes a cultural phenomenon that just drives all kinds of other opportunities, and they then grew into stories. So I do think that there is potential for NFT projects just based on the value of the art and the uniqueness of the art and the direction to then inspire bigger things and more things. So I do think that that's very possible.
The two big questions I feel like we've all been waiting for. The first one, I would love to know if there are artists that aren't currently in the NFT space, but that you think absolutely should be, or project creators, or who should be entering NFTs that isn't in it currently.
Yeah, there's a designer who I've worked with in the past named Nick Yarger. He now lives in the Pacific Northwest. He's from Southern California. He was the creative director at Billabong and Quicksilver. I think he worked for Tony Hawk as his head of creative for a while. He worked with Shepard Fairey for a while, and has this amazing art style that's inspired by tattoo art and the Southern California beach skate scene. And I think there's just a tremendous future for him in NFTs. And I've tried to encourage him to get into this.
So now we'll publicly encourage him. You'll send me a link to his site or something, his Twitter, and we'll post it as part of the show notes.
So, but he makes his living day to day as working for. He has actually just founded his own ad agency, so he's doing graphic design as an ad agency. But he can easily transfer over. And there's another poster artist who I love named Neil Williams, who. He's a gig poster artist, so he does rock and roll posters. Foo Fighters, Black Keys are some of his clients. So when you think of the poster art, that gig art, Neil Williams has done a lot of really top bands and has just a really unique style that I think is really, really cool and fun. And I would love to see him get into the space.
Something I've said on this podcast before, and that I've actually said to friends of mine, and I'm curious if you're going to agree with what I'm about to say, I think you will, is that we need more writers in the blockchain, in the NFT space. And I think because the outside world thinks these are just JPEGs and they're just like visual and it's just art, a lot of people don't realize that what the vast majority of these projects are going to need to stay relevant long-term are stories, are good stories, which means writers. This is a shout out to all the writers out there. If you're already listening to this podcast, you probably don't need to hear this, but tell your writer friends to start looking into the blockchain, because all of these projects need people to write stories for them. Most of them do not have writers on staff. Agree with that statement, John?
100%, in fact, 100,000%. I've seen so many projects struggling on the writing side and looking for writers. You look at their web pages and you can see, if you know a writer, please send them our way. And absolutely, writers is where we really need a lot more creative contribution to the blockchain. It's definitely the next kind of big push that has to happen.
Okay, so you have seen, and in some cases, overseen some of the biggest, most profitable franchise intellectual properties in the world. What are the projects that you're eyeing in the NFT space right now that you think have the potential to become those next major IP franchises?
I wouldn't put it the way of become the next major IP franchises, but what projects am I inspired by? What do I like about the team that just has a great feel, a great idea? Now, they might not become the biggest projects ever, but I just think there's a great team there, and that team will go on to either build something great or do the next thing that will be great. And a couple of Deadfellas certainly is very inspiring. I love what the Deadfellas teams are doing. The Woodies, I think Woodies have a really good view of just a long-term, slow build project perspective, that this isn't a pump and dump, or this is a very drawn out, slow term. They've been very thoughtful about it. I love Savage Droids. I'm an investor in Savage Droids, which is one of the Block projects, just because of the deflationary aspect of it. I think there's just some really great thinking that's gone into that. And it's another project I admire. I've obviously invested in that project. I like Grim Syndicate, which is on the Solana chain. And it's really more just from the art style. I just love the art style of Grim Syndicate. And a project I'm eyeing right now, I don't know much about the project itself, but the artist behind it is someone I've actually been following in the real world for some time. And it's his first move into the NFT space. And the project is called Crypto Monster Lab. I think it's going to launch here actually in about a month. So maybe it's a hot tip. Take a look at Crypto Monster Lab. But the artist is a Peruvian artist named Santiago Uceda. And I've actually worked with Santiago. We commissioned some work from him in a prior job that I had. And so I've just been a huge fan of Santiago's work. It's like this very approachable, friendly woodcut style. And I think it's a very it's the kind of NFT that you're going to give to your child. So I've set up an NFT wallet for my daughter. And when I see art that I just think that she loves or I love that speaks to one of us, I'll buy her an NFT and put it in her wallet. And when she turns 18, she can go off to college or wherever with her NFT wallet. And I think Santiago's work is just perfect for that.
I love it. We will link to all of those below. My grandmother, when I was born, started giving me Disney stock for every birthday, etc., which you can imagine as a kid, you're like, what the heck is this crap? I want a toy. And of course, now as an adult, I am so grateful for, and Disney's done very well for me. So I appreciate that. I don't have a ton of Disney money. That sounds like I'm a trust fund kid. I'm very much not, but.
Yeah, my daughter's NFT collection is bigger than mine right now.
Oh, that's awesome.
I keep seeing projects I just love for her, like unicorns or skull bunnies, and I just throw them in her NFT wallet. So
I love that idea. Cool Cats actually flagged that when I interviewed Klon, who's the artist for Cool Cats, and he said one of the earliest ways they resonated with people were families who felt like they could actually involve their kids in the Cool Cats project, and that prior to that, Bored Apes isn't necessarily accessible to a kid to some extent. That there's usually mature themes with some of these projects, and so that was a way they felt like they were able to differentiate, was that family friendly aspect.
Yeah, my daughter will just sit here with me as we're looking through different NFTs, and she'll say, "I like that," and depending upon gas.
How old is she?
She's 6. She's in first grade.
So
depending upon gas fees, I'll add it to her wallet. And that's actually one of the great things about L2s, I think, that's going to help, is that it's hard to buy a $100 NFT and then pay $150 in gas fees, or $200.
No, I've been trying to bridge now. I'm like trying to hop from L1s to L2s, and I'm like, this is expensive too.
Yeah.
I'm like, it's getting, it all is expensive right now. But I don't know, bigger brains than mine are working on how to limit that. So I'm optimistic we'll get there. Well, this has been awesome, John. I'm sure we'll have you back at some point, maybe to even do a deeper dive on L2s, because I know you're doing work on that side of things as well. And is there anything you want to close with? Anything you feel like we didn't get to talk about? Advice for people who are either building a project that are trying to create lasting IP, or investing in it, or just anything in general you think that should be said that we haven't covered?
I think we're all in this beginning. It's still the very early stages. Let's all support one another and try to build great things, and just the future is going to be awesome. If anyone wants to get in touch and has any questions, I'm happy to, within certain limits, give them some free advice or consulting if they really care about kind of IP and NFTs. And
cool. Well, thank you so much, John. Again, this is great, and I really appreciate you hopping on and spelling this out for us. And again, we'll check in again as this whole space is evolving, and see if it plays out as you, at least, or sort of both of us imagine.
Yeah, great. I'm excited to come back.
Hey, we hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, head over to Bankless HQ right now to develop your crypto investing skills and learn how to free yourself from banks and gain your financial independence. We recommend joining our daily newsletter, podcast, and community as a Bankless Premium subscriber to get the most out of your Bankless experience. You'll get access to our market analysis, our alpha leaks, and exclusive content, and even the Bankless token for airdrops, raffles, and unlocks. If you're interested in crypto, the Bankless community is where you want to be. Click the link in the description to become a Bankless Premium subscriber today. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for in-depth interviews with industry leaders, Ask Me Anythings, and weekly roll-ups where we summarize the week in crypto and other fantastic content. Thanks everyone for watching and being on the journey as we build out the Bankless Nation.